Foundation. I am Mandy Drogan, a senior fellow here at TPPF, and today we are here to learn about the growing threat of Islamism and Islamists. I want to lay a baseline down. This is not about a religion. This is not about the religion of Islam. This is about a political ideology, a theocratic political ideology that is using subversive tactics, buying our land, infiltrating our schools, and raising up a generation of Americans that hate America. You will hear about the tactics that are being used and the different entities that they are using to use these subversive methods. I am so excited to be joined here today by Chairman Cole Hefner, the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, Representative Joanne Schaffner, Sam Westrop of the Middle East Forum and the director of Islamist Watch, and my colleague Eamon Blair of Secure and Sovereign Nations. Today we're going to dive deep. We all heard Governor Abbott declare the Muslim Brotherhood and CAIR foreign terrorist organizations. Amen. That was great. But what you're going to hear is it gets way worse than that. There are more networks that have embedded themselves in our country, in our state, that are actively working against American values. So today we're going to talk about who they are, the tactics they're using, and what we as Americans can do to stop the weaponization of our Constitution, to stop a violent overthrow of our political system, the greatest system that's ever existed on the face of the earth, and to ensure that Americans know that Texans are going to lead the battle, lead the way in the fight against the Islamist attempt to implement a caliphate. So I'm going to turn it over. I'm just going to get started. No frills, no froof. I want to turn it over to Sam Westrop of Islamist Watch so that he can talk to you about what's happening here in Texas and the additional sects that we certainly hope that our great leaders, our legislators, will ensure that they too are designated for as terrorist organization, and we can shut down the flow of money and power into these networks. Sam.
I think we've all heard of the Muslim Brotherhood. A lot of people have. In fact, since 9/11, the Muslim Brotherhood has been a fairly familiar name within our media and our policy circles, even if we're only getting around to finally doing something about it now. But the focus on the Brotherhood was perhaps a fixation, a hyperfixation. There are other Islamist networks operating across the country. In fact, I think it's important to remember the majority of the world's Muslims do not live in the Middle East. South Asia has twice the number of Muslims the Middle East does. And South Asian Islamism is a very prominent problem in the United States, and particularly in Texas. By the numbers, they outnumber the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood has the money. These other networks have the manpower, the institutions, and the capability to radicalize not just this generation, but future generations of Muslim children. If you want to look at what happens when you don't delineate these networks, understand them, and counteract them, take a look at Europe. Take a look at European cities and towns, especially in northern England or the suburbs of Paris, now under the control of Islamist movements. This is a terrifying reality that Texas and the United States can prevent if it acts. The problem is we have decades of a refusal by policymakers and by media to understand the threat, to track the threat, to look at the data, to understand the institutions, the finances, the political infiltration. Now, my organization, the Middle East Forum, does that. We differentiate rather between Islam and Islamism, and we work with the former to defeat the latter. But we track the networks within American Islam. There are 8,000 Islamic nonprofits in the United States. 650 of those are in Texas. Across the country, and particularly in Texas, between a third and a quarter of those are run by these Islamist networks. And I track 6 in particular. There's lots of smaller additional ones, but 6 major ones which are active in Texas. The first, the Brotherhood, you've all heard of. When the Holy Land Foundation, a major Hamas terrorist organization, terror financing organization, was shut down in the 2000s, the federal government didn't finish the job. They shut down this one organization, but they left a lot of peripheral groups untouched. And in fact, that trial of the Holy Land Foundation in North Texas in 2008 named a whole bunch of groups from the Brotherhood as unindicted co-conspirators. Today, they continue to operate across Texas. Indeed, they set up new charities that are openly working with Hamas in the Middle East and their proxies. But the Brotherhood, as I mentioned, is just one of these groups. The Salafis, a very important movement in Texas. I'm sure many of you here have heard of EPIC, the mosque in Plano, the East Plano Islamic Center. Well, that is the hub for what we call modernist Salafism. And when I say hub, I don't mean just Texas. I mean around the world, Salafi Muslims, an Islamist movement, look to this mosque, and it's particularly its leader, Yasir Qadhi, and another imam called Omar Suleiman at a nearby mosque, to lead this new modernist Salafi movement. The modernist Salafis are so dangerous because they reject the jihad for the moment of the Salafi jihadists, but they have looked to the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood, its tactics, and its mistakes, and now have formed a smarter follow-on from Brotherhood ideals and strategy. Salafis are very dangerous, and it is here in Texas, not elsewhere in the US, but here in Texas that they are headquartered. But moving to South Asia. South Asian Islam falls into two camps. Sunni Islam, this is, Deobandis and Barelwis. The Deobandis should be a name that everyone in America is familiar with, because we spent 20 years fighting them in Afghanistan. The Taliban is the best expression of Deobandi Islamism. Not a single federal policymaker or security service person I've ever spoken to even knows the name. We failed to understand the underpinning ideology behind our enemies. And Deobandis, while we were fighting the Taliban in Afghanistan and the mountains of Pakistan, Deobandi madrasas were being set up here in the US. Deobandi charities operate to this day, now operating in cahoots with the Taliban in Afghanistan. Deobandi charities from Illinois all the way to New York. And here in Texas, Deobandi madrasas down in Sugar Land and also seminaries up in Dallas are training the next generation of Deobandi imams who are being exported to mosques all over the country. If I had to name one network that I would argue presents the greatest threat to Texas, it is the Deobandis. This should be a name you're all familiar with. Now, as I finish the other networks, let me mention all these groups I'm mentioning will be listed in a report called Islamism in Texas that will be available on the Middle East Forum website later this week. So all these names will be there, and you can look them up and read more for yourself. The Barelwis is another South Asian movement. They have only recently become radicalized in the last 20, 30 years. They've got particularly worse. One Barelwi group is called Dawat-e-Islami. The British government blames this group for promoting anti-blasphemy extremism across Europe. Dawat-e-Islami members have assassinated a Punjab governor. They have murdered a shopkeeper in Glasgow for being the wrong type of Muslim. And they carried out a stabbing attack in front of the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris just a few years ago. Dawat-e-Islami's headquarters is in Texas. In fact, they run a seminary down in Fort Bend County with which local police, Pakistani members of the local police, Pakistani-American members of the local police, are intimately involved. I am terrified by the level of infiltration by these groups and the apparent indifference of federal government and state government, although I hope the latter is now changing. Jamaat-e-Islami. This is often referred to as the South Asian cousin of the Muslim Brotherhood. And it was founded just after the Brotherhood, but the founder, a man called Abdul al-Maududi, actually inspired the Brotherhood, and especially the Brotherhood's ideologue Sayyid Qutb. Jamaat-e-Islami has more grassroots numbers than the Brotherhood in the United States. It's about to take power in Bangladesh. There's an election in a few days' time in Bangladesh. Jamaat-e-Islami is poised to win. The last time they were in power in Bangladesh was when it was East Pakistan. And Jamaat-e-Islami members helped murder hundreds of thousands of people in coordination with the Pakistani army. After that genocide, and it was a genocide, and it was called a genocide at the time, those leaders fled to the West, where they set up the Muslim community institutions today. Groups like the Islamic Circle of North America. Groups like Helping Hand for Relief and Development, which openly work with terrorist groups in Pakistan. Down in Houston, Jamaat-e-Islami mosques like the Islamic Society of Greater Houston are notorious hotbeds of extremism. Again, they run schools and they get public funding. and they're aiming to get public funding. This is an enormous crisis we have in Texas. All these networks should be familiar to law enforcement, to policymakers, and it doesn't include, of course, the Shias, the Khomeinists, supporters of the Iranian regime. The best example of this, the Islamic Education Center of Houston. The imam there is directly appointed by the supreme leader of Iran. The mosque runs events in praise of the regime. This is a foreign government entity, a hostile foreign government entity, responsible for the murder of thousands of American and British troops operating here on US soil. And Department of Justice apparently does not care. I'm hoping the state government will step in. There's lots more to talk about, but as you can see, it's a wide array of networks. I'm happy to go into detail on any of them.
Thank you, Sam. All right, so that gives you just a little taste of what we are dealing with, and that Texas really is the epicenter. And I think it's important that we talk about the Red-Green Alliance and the influence of the Mexican cartels and how that this is all tied together. The Red-Green Alliance, for those of you that are not familiar, that is the Marxists, red, and that is the Islamists, green. And they are working together, again, to subvert our laws. They are working together to educate children. They not just start private schools. They are utilizing public funding, doing charter schools as well. They are what you have seen with the Islamic Games last month, what you have seen just last week with Doha, where that they are trying to make this sound like it is a friendly thing to wear hijabs and all of this other stuff. This is a part of the soft power play. Amen. I'd like to turn it to you to talk about how that the partnership, particularly with the narco states and the traffickers in the southern border, are working together to, again, move product, move money, and move people into the state of Texas.
Yeah, thank you. So, you know, at the Department of Defense and now the Department of War, we've been tracking Hezbollah and proxies from Iran for a long time. In fact, the Asymmetric Warfare Group back in 2010 did a war game effort to try to figure out how to go after these proxies of Iran in our Western Hemisphere. And unfortunately, that led to nothing. And then later, General John Kelly, who was part of the first Trump administration, went in front of Congress under the Obama administration and said, hey, we're seeing that these satellite sites, we're seeing these satellite sites across the entire Western Hemisphere. And our southern border is open. And they have direct ties to the Mexican cartels. Now, why is that a problem? I thought, who here thinks that the border is secure? Okay, all right, so look, so the Mexican cartels, ever since the late 80s and early 90s, they established operational control of the border because at that time, the PRI, or the one-party rule of Mexico, started to decrease its power and control. So the cartels rose as an insurgency. At that same time, they also made, who's heard of the Belt and Road Initiative by China? Or the CCP. They created a Belt and Road Initiative, or a Silk Road, to every single one of your communities. Okay? Everything that flows, both illicit and licit, now coming from Mexico, since they have a symbiotic relationship with the Mexican government, both at the national and subnational level, is now tied to the Mexican cartels. So now that the Mexican cartels have direct access, have control of our southern border, still to this day, and I'm going to go back for a second. Why would they have control of the border still to this day? I thought Pete Hegseth and the Department of War has established a national defense area across the border. Well, guess what? In Texas, 95% of the property on our southern border is private property. So unless we have eminent domain, it's going to remain more open than the other states that have a national defense area. So that means just like if I was going into Afghanistan and I wanted to support and secure tribes from the Taliban government, what are they going to ask me as a soldier? Can you protect me from the Taliban? And the answer, of course, is no, and so they would choose the Taliban. So the same thing is happening on our southern border. So it takes a lot more effort from our own state itself to figure out ways to secure that border. Now that the Mexican cartels have complete control, still have complete control of the area, especially on the southern border, and have access to every one of your communities, guess who they're going to sell it to? That is one of their greatest assets they can sell. And that is access to you, to the Islamic movements. It is access to you to the CCP. And so now that they have direct access, back in the early 2010s, we already knew that they were working with Hezbollah to establish, I forgot the tunnels. There we go. I can't even think of the name. Tunnels underneath in West Texas, in San Diego, because the same type of sand that they saw in Israel was the same type that we were seeing in our border as well. So this whole tie, if we do not, like he said, if we do not understand the threat, if we do not understand the networks and why they are actually embedded in our communities, understand their capabilities and capacities, who their networks are, every single one of our responses are going to fail.
Thank you, Eamon. Representative Schaffner, as you're out on the campaign trail right now, so you are talking to a lot of citizens. You're hearing the concerns. Can you talk to Texans and explain what others from across the state are saying, what they're seeing, and what they're asking for?
Thank you so much. I'm in East Texas, and you would think, what does East Texas have to do with Islam? Well, I-69, I-59 comes from Laredo, the border straight up through our district. And so we've got this pipeline going up and down right there. It's so incredibly important. Every single solitary place I go or speak, someone asks about it. And in a way, we can thank now Governor Mandami of New York, because now a lot more people are awake. They can't believe it happened. They're more aware. Minnesota, Minneapolis, etc. Dearborn, Michigan, as we've seen, Dearborn, Michigan is now all Muslim city council. They have now just voted to not allow women to be elected officers and officials. So they can't run for office anymore. So once again, this kind of starts. Again, just like Mandy said, this has nothing to do with the religion of, it has nothing to do with people. It has to do with this political ideology that is aggressive, that we have 14 centuries of history of. Because if we remember, Libya used to be Christian, Syria used to be Christian, Egypt used to be Christian, Turkey used to be Christian. All these used to be Christian nations. They came into Spain. Spain pushed them back. Malta pushed them back. But they are here, and they have a plan, and it's very sophisticated. But we're so grateful that every average citizen that might not necessarily have this topic are talking about this in their home, because they're awake and they're scared and they want to know what to do. And another factor is a lot of these hotbeds in Texas started outside a major city, maybe in the county of these places. Well, they come in to every single one of our counties, less permitting, and establish neighborhoods, Muslim-only cemeteries, whatever it takes. And so what do we do here? Do we give our county judges more authority? Do we give away our freedom if we have a border ranch or border property? You know, again, for your safety, if you'll just give up some of your freedom. And so that is a lot to balance. How much do we give up in order to be safe? But it is absolutely so important that we educate everyone and inform everyone is the most important thing right now. Tell everyone at your community groups and churches and things like that. Go to Sam's website, etc., to inform everyone and wake everyone up of what's going on.
Thank you, Representative Schaffner, and I think that is a great point, is talking about this. You know, that red-green alliance that we talked about, what has happened with, under the guise of diversity, equity, inclusion, right? And we've seen that being used, radicalized, racist policies for so long. Great Americans have been uninformed, unable to articulate there is something wrong. So to be clear, we are talking about Islamism. That is the political ideology that Islamists want to push forth on America. And we had a great question in a briefing about why America. The truth is, as goes Texas, so will go America. Islamists believe it is their job to impart a caliphate. And as radical as that sounds, that is what we are seeing when we talk about Dearborn, Michigan. That is what we're seeing when we look across the ocean at our sister country, the UK. And I'm gonna come to Sam in just a second, but it's important. That is a harbinger. They are weaponizing our amazing Constitution, our First Amendment, and it is important for everyone here in this room, everyone watching, every Texan, to be able to articulate the difference between Islam, the religion, versus Islamism, the theocratic, autocratic, dictatorial, political ideology that these networks are seeking to implement through subversive tactics, including in our schools, in our education system, in our colleges of education. All of this is what is happening. So I just want to reiterate that this is what we're seeing, and we want everyone in here to be able to name the difference, because that is important, because if not, they will try and flip it on you and call you some sort of name that you know you're not. This is not about a religion. It is a political ideology. All right, Chairman Hefner. Last session, you led the way. Y'all passed over a dozen bills to try and deal with particularly land issues where these entities were purchasing land. We all know about Epic Center. Talk to us about what you all did at the Homeland Security Committee, but also what we are going to have to do as we prepare for the 90th legislative session.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Texas Public Policy Foundation, for putting this on. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Yeah, so my job as the Homeland Security and Public Safety and Veterans Affairs Chair is to look for ways that the state can protect ourselves from hostile foreign adversaries. And when we started down that road year before last, we were mainly, kind of focused on land and property and our food supply, and that is vitally important. But as we dug deeper into the issues, we saw that there were many other threats that we were facing. A lot of these threats, and I know we like to punch back at Congress, but we're dealing with problems that have been brought to us by the actions or inactions of a federal government. These 501c that we're talking about being abused, either that set up that organization is being abused and it's not being investigated to see if it's being used for harm. And so these are things that we as a state are going to have to be looking for ways that we can step in with the resources and authority that we have to step in and fill those gaps. So we passed several laws last session, banning foreign adversaries from owning land. We banned sister cities. We banned investing public funds in foreign adversarial investments. And we banned lobbying on behalf of foreign adversaries. And so there was about a dozen bills or so. We created the Homeland Security Division within the Department of Public Safety that focuses on keeping us safe from these foreign adversaries. Before we created that division, that was Senator Tan Parker in the Senate, and I carried the bill in the House. I believe it was 36, Senate Bill 36. And we had just a handful of officers and agents within DPS that worked on Homeland Security issues. So now we have a dedicated division with over 20 staff that works with the Department of National Security, FBI, and our federal partners to make sure that we're keeping our folks safe. We also I need to slow down. My East Texas lingo is getting in my way here. We created the Hostile Foreign Adversary Unit. That was Senator Hughes over in the Senate and myself in the House. And so a lot of stuff is coming at us fast, but rest assured that my committee and my focus is going to be on aggressively what we can do as a state to fill those gaps. I've talked to folks in Washington. The White House is excited about what we're doing here. We have some good federal partners right now in the White House. They don't have the manpower and the bandwidth and the resources, and so they're excited about partnering with states and working together on these issues. So it's kind of an exciting but scary time to be chairing this committee. We find out more and more things that are coming at us. We also, one thing we did create that I think is going to be vital as well is a committee that will conduct tabletop exercises to do kind of war game threats and different kinds of attacks that can come from our adversaries, be it food supply disruption, pharmaceutical supply, physical attacks, cyber attacks. What do we do if these things happen? How can we prepare ourselves for that? So you take that from China to Islam, to the different threats that are before us, and so we've got a lot to do, and you're going to see some interim hearings focused on these issues coming up this year.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That's right. And I think you're going to have thousands more patriots that are going to be there to support y'all.
The more the better.
So I want to go back to Sam. You touched on this. London is a harbinger. I would like for you to explain how these Islamists gain control, number one, and what you've seen there and what we are seeing here. And then I want you to talk about why it seems like there's this explosion, particularly in our education system, with raising up a new generation that have become Islamist fanatics.
The ascendancy of Islamism in the West has been driven by two things. One, the global explosion of Islamism as an ideological force, spurred on by, in the 90s, events in Bosnia and Chechnya, then, of course, of 9/11 and the war on terror. That's one explanation. But the roots of global Islamism go back a little further, of course. The Brotherhood was founded in the 1930s. The Deobandis and Birelwis I mentioned, founded in the 19th century. So there is a centuries-long ideological impetus behind this, but it has come to this zenith over the last 20 years because of world events, on the one hand. On the other hand, within Western democracies, Islamism initially struggled to compete with extant Muslim community expressions of their faith. Islam is a very diverse religion. There are literally thousands of competing movements and sects delineated by schools of jurisprudence, schools of legal thought, Sufi sects, movements based on ethnicity and religion and so on, and cultural background as well. There is no Muslim pope within the Sunni system. There's no Muslim grand rabbi, chief rabbi. There's no archbishop. This means there is no hierarchy. It's difficult to impose top-down reform, impossible almost, in fact. But it also means that the faith fractures, Sunni Islam fractures. And over the last 1,400 years, it has fractured an untold number of times, leading to this incredibly diverse array of Islam as we now know it. The Islamists had a real difficult time dealing with this. How can they take over all these different communities if they all come from slightly different expressions of the faith? Then Western governments stepped in. And around the time of the Salman Rushdie affair, you might remember the author whose death was solicited by not just the Iranian regime and Wahhabis in the Gulf, but by Islamists in Europe as well. In the result of the Salman Rushdie affair, the British government and governments across Europe adopted something called multiculturalism policy. Now, multiculturalism is often erroneously used as a synonym for diversity. Not so. In the 90s, in the 80s and 90s especially, multiculturalism referred to a new idea for how people should be governed in Europe. And it came down to the essential belief that you should no longer see your citizens as individuals, but as blocks, racial and religious blocks, and rule them as those blocks, and delegate power to those blocks. So, the very groups involved with inciting the killing of Salman Rushdie, and these were, in Britain, this was primarily the Deobandis and this group called Jamaat-e-Islami, both of which I mentioned earlier, were rewarded for their efforts with power and public money. And across Europe, and over the last 10 years in the US as well, Islamists have been given the money and thus the legitimacy to run Muslim communities. That is how the Islamists took control of Western Islam, through government public funding and by policymakers looking the other way as theocratic forces impose themselves on partly moderate communities that had really just sought to practice their faith in private. This is the great horror of Islamist control, is that we're to blame. We've allowed these groups and we've funded these groups. Now, some of that is changing, as you've seen over the past few years with the Trump administration cutting federal funds, but I'm afraid we're a long way from fixing the problem. And if I look at the amount of state and city funding for Islamists across this country, it is in the tens and tens and tens of millions. If you take the latest 990 tax return for all of the 8,000 501c who file, which is about half, there's a field in there called government grants. And the last time I checked, just taking the last, I think, 5-6 years of data, that was almost $1 billion of reported government funding. Bear in mind, this field is unpoliced. And I've come across many examples of groups just not reporting any as government funding at all. So I imagine the true figure is in the many billions. This is a horrifying state of affairs, but the good news is that it's partly solvable. We cut them off financially. We shut down their 501(c)s. We remove their public funding. And we end theocratic reliance on you, the taxpayer.
Thank you, Sam. Eamon, can you explain how the Islamists can utilize our asylum system, they can utilize our humanitarian infrastructure, and to subvert our laws and to not trigger counterterrorism measures?
Yeah, great question. So if you look, ever since the 1950s, there was a refugee compact that was signed internationally. And ever since then, weaponized, or the weaponization of mass migration, has been happening across the world. And the whole idea and concept is for a state, an adversarial state, say like Iran or China, or a non-state, say like Al-Shabaab, right, that we saw stuff happening in Minneapolis, will utilize the movement of mass amounts of people to erode sovereignty in another state, to force the state security apparatus to have to use its the security as well as their military to conduct humanitarian relief. Therefore, making it almost impossible to secure, whether that's internally for public safety or externally at the borders itself. So now that this form of hybrid warfare to eradicate sovereignty is now seen worldwide today, these groups are going to use this method to infiltrate the United States, and have been doing so for quite some time. We saw under the Biden administration, we saw millions and millions come into the United States. Myself as a Border Patrol agent could not vet them. Okay? So I could not vet a 4-year-old little girl, let alone someone who is seeking harm into our country based off of their Islamic ideology. Especially if they're working with the Mexican cartels to block their identity, create fake documents, fake IDs, or work with other nation states in our Western Hemisphere to bring them in. And so because of this, and then their work with humanitarian agencies, I know Sam talks a lot about that, humanitarian agencies. Who remembers all the NGOs that facilitated this invasion into the U.S.? The Attorney General Paxton did an investigation, so did Florida as well. Those NGOs worked hand in hand with the Islamic movement NGOs as well to move thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of foreign nationals from these areas into the U.S. Now, this was all under the guise and to create specifically a hypocrisy cost in you, using your values, your Christian values of compassion and love, of what Christ truly showed forth his people, or whatever religion you may be, your God, that God of compassion, and use that against you. What are you going to do? Push back asylum seekers and refugees who are only here to seek a good life? This is all by design. This is completely engineered, okay? Because it forces you to do that. And one big way they do that, who here has ever read the book 1984 by George Orwell? All right, you guys remember Newspeak? All right, so words were redefined to forward the ideology of those tyrannical governments. The words have been redefined to forward an ideology in your mindset, in your neighbor's mindsets, that open borders are great. We went from illegal alien to undocumented non-citizen to a migrant to asylum seeker, refugee, and then at the end, a newcomer. Now that they're here in the United States and occupy, we went from, oh, they're members of our community. Oh, no, they're our neighbors. Oh, wait, they're us. So when we see that level of change in terms of ideology and level in terms of language, specifically change to change your thoughts and actions being done, you see that with whether that's going to be Governor Walz, whether that's going to be in whatever state right now that's seeking to protect the illegal aliens from ICE enforcement or for immigration enforcement, just know it's all completely by design.
Thank you, Eamon. That's 100% correct. And I'm going to turn to Representative Schaffner. But I want to point something out that what Eamon is talking about, it is an attempt to normalize Islamists' plans, to normalize and to weaponize your instincts to care for others and normalize allowing adversaries into our systems. You have to look no further than right here in the People's Republic of Austin. Because I'm gonna tell you what's going on is a lot of people think, oh, it just happens in crazy town Austin. Well, we can look and see, just in January, it was made Muslim Heritage Month. But what happened before that several years ago was they started honoring Cesar Chavez, union worker. Si se puede? Anybody remember that? If not, yes we can. You remember that? That's what it is. It was taken by candidate Barack Obama to be a rallying cry for leftists. Now, the red happened 2 years ago. Now what's happened? Our school system, Austin ISD, they still had Good Friday up until now. You got off Good Friday, and then on Monday, you got off on Cesar Chavez Day. But now what have they done? Now, y'all, there is no Good Friday in Austin ISD. That has been done away with, but they still have one of the two most holy Muslim holidays, Eid al-Fitr. Muslim holiday, the values, the standards of morality. Our great legislative leaders passed a law saying the 10 Commandments need to be in our schools. Not because we want every single American or demand every single American to worship the God of the 10 Commandments, but because those 10 Commandments are by which our standards of morality, our legal system, every aspect of America was built off of that. You cannot be a well-educated American if you don't understand this. But they are systematically removing all aspects of American culture, of Western civilization. And that's important for everyone to understand. It is methodical. It is planned out. The Red-Green Alliance, the Marxist Islamist Alliance, they are working in our schools and in our communities, in our legal systems through lawfare. They are setting up their own systems of government. It's why they're attempting to buy massive plots of land. Thank God for Chairman Hefner and all the other leaders, yes, who shut that down. Thank God for Governor Abbott for recognizing we need to designate these entities as foreign terrorist groups. And I am so grateful that Lieutenant Governor Patrick put on his interim charges that we're going to get these nefarious entities out of our classrooms. But they are there. Just know that every Arabic program that is in our public schools is being provided by the Qatari Foundation International, which Qatar is called the main artery of funding for Hamas. Just know that these teachers that are coming in to teach our kids Mandarin under the guise of world culture and language are coming from the CCP. So it is important that we all understand what is happening here. This is a wraparound approach. It is starting from when they are little to when they grow up. Representative Schaffner, I want to talk to you about our education system. What do you believe needs to happen from a legislative standpoint to ensure that we get these radical Islamist ideologies out of our classrooms, stop the teacher training, and stop the content?
So we have to go after this Qatari money, not also in higher education. A lot of A&M, I think, just closed their program in Doha, as far as that concerned, because there's so much money coming in from these countries, you know, in the guise of, we just want to help, you know. Really, it's we want access to all your research. We want access to your students. We want to train the teachers in order to allow this to happen. Again, I'm sure so many teachers, superintendents, etc., just think it's just another religion. Sure, you can come in. Oh, you're doing it for free? I don't have to use my funds that the state government gives me? Y'all going to pay for it? Great. Sure, come on, go ahead. We have to find the source of all these entities and cut them off at the source. We can't let this happen. Having the Ten Commandments back in the school, having prayer and Bible reading back in the school. How long has that been? How long has that been? Yeah. So decades and decades and decades. And so this is a start. You know, on one hand, I want to throw in some hope, you know, because this is such a heavy topic. And the fastest growing religion in Iran is Christianity. There are many, many, many reports and books being proclaiming that many Muslims in these countries are coming to Christ. So there's always, always going to be hope. And when we know better, we do better. And Texas is the tip of the spear for the rest of the nation, therefore Western civilization. So we have to do something. We have to let our school board know. We've got to let our superintendents know. In every single one of our communities, we have to let them know. Y'all are now to go forth and let them know. Because all of us eat politics for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Most people don't. So we have to inform everyone about these things.
Thank you. Chairman Hefner, what is your hope for the next legislative session, the 90th, which starts here in almost exactly 11 months? It's January 12th, so we're right at the 11-month mark. What is your hope, and what do you need from great patriots here, out there watching, for everyone to come together to ensure that we pass strong constitutional laws to protect our way of life?
You know, my hope, my commitment would be to do everything we can from the committee and the House and the legislature to keep our state safe, and that requires teamwork. You know, when I think we're blessed and cursed to have a part-time legislature. We're only there for 140 days, and it's a good thing that we're not there all the time dreaming up things to do. But on the other hand, when government's going to find something to do, and so. But on the other hand, we have a lot to do in a very short amount of time, and so a lot of things coming at us. Not just in the Homeland Security Committee, but all the committees are important. And so to help us, my hope would be that the bills that we draft, the bills that we move through the process, that they work, that they're effective, that they're not just words on paper, that there's no workarounds and loopholes, that they're solid. And so that's where we depend on people like Texas Public Policy Foundation and their subject matter experts, as well as others that can help us kind of think, because these groups, these radical groups, the CCP, they're always thinking, and they're smart. They're not stupid people, and so they're manipulating our own laws and our own freedoms against us. And so to think ahead of that is a challenge. A lot of times we're reactive as a legislature, and so we need to figure out how to be proactive and try to get out ahead of it. And so I think that's where we lean on people to help us. Like Representative Schaffner said, we need to shine a light on these issues. It seems like, and Sam, you can see, it seems like it just happened all of a sudden. Wow, where did this come from? Well, it started back in the 60s, and in the 90s we see these leaps forward. And so like Joanne said, people are busy, they're living their lives, but we need to make sure we're shedding light on this. And so that's my hope, that we're effective and that we pass strong, solid legislation to help protect our citizens while protecting their freedoms.
Thank you, Chairman. We're going to take questions in just 1 minute, but before we do, I want to ask Sam really quick. He's named them off. There's a whole lot of groups that I can't say them. I can't say them, but I know that they will be posted on the Middle East Forum and Islamic Watch website, and we will make sure that everyone in attendance, everyone that is watching online, has access to this. But Sam, if you could wave a magic wand and designate additional enemies of Texas, enemies of America. What entities do Texans and our leaders need to recognize they too must be designated foreign terrorist organizations? If you could just rattle them off.
Oh, for sure. Jamaat-e-Islami, as I mentioned, is about to take over the nation of Bangladesh. Long history of violence. It is involved in terror finance across the world and has operations here in Texas and across the United States. Jamaat should have been designated decades ago. We've designated proxies, offshoots, much as we did with the Brotherhood, with Hamas, but the whole movement needs to be designated. Secular Bengalis have been calling for this for a very long time, and no one listened, and they were right. Jamaat-e-Islami. Tablighi Jamaat, the DC Capitol shooter, you might remember that a few months ago. He was a Tablighi Jamaat member. Tablighi Jamaat is the missionary movement of the Deobandis. Tablighi Jamaat has been named by countless Western law enforcement agencies and policymakers as a key vehicle for radicalization. The 7/7 bombers in Britain went through Tablighi Jamaat, as Richard Reed, the shoe bomber, the transatlantic shoe bomber. Tablighi Jamaat's headquarters in the United States is in Garland, Texas. It should be designated, its mosques and schools, where it's miseducating, radicalizing generations of kids, should be shut down. Dawati-Islami, I mentioned, the Barawi group, I believe they should be designated. Salafis are very difficult to designate because they operate in a nebulous form. But so does the Brotherhood. So that has provided a blueprint for possible designations of the Salafis as well. We do, the biggest thing though, and the report will mention lists a whole bunch of other groups and networks that deserve to be designated. The biggest thing is in actually enforcing the law. Hamas has been designated in this country for decades, yet Hamas operations exist openly and operate with impunity across the country, including in North Texas. The federal government chooses not to prosecute. Designations mean nothing unless we enforce the law. The state governments can do a great deal in pressuring the federal government to act, and the state government, as it's shown, can also act itself. That is the most important thing to do going forward. And just very, very, very lastly, because remember I forgot to answer your question about the schools earlier, I'll just say this. There are hundreds of schools across the United States teaching Islamist ideas to young children from pre-K all the way through to college. Over the past few years, Islamist networks, including the ones I've mentioned, have set up an industry of seminaries, of schools, and of madrasas to radicalize not just this generation, but future generations of American Muslim school children. There are 20 here in Texas we're particularly worried about. All of them are trying to get public money. We published a report called the Texas Islamist Schools Industry. You'll find it on the Middle East Forum website. Please do read it. There's a lot we can do to pressure policymakers into making sure none of these schools ever get a dime of your money.
Thank you, Sam. Okay, we're going to open the floor up for some questions.
Thank you. Sam, you talked about how many of these organizations are decades, if not centuries old. One of the hallmarks of that, I think, is we've seen that they're okay getting these small wins every 5-10 years that kind of slip past us. How do we, as those opposed to these movements, maintain the same amount of diligence to fight back against this as the groups who are okay with getting one or two little things every couple years and spread that out over a generation?
I mean, you're right that public attention and thus policymakers' attention is not consistent. It still astounds me, as I mentioned earlier, that even just a few years after 9/11, we were already beginning to drop the prosecutions into Hamas networks. We've never learned the name of the underpinning ideology for the Taliban. So in some ways, it's always going to fall to organizations like the Middle East Forum and to organizations like the Texas Public Policy Foundation to remind policymakers. The biggest obstacle for me in this country is the incurious media. The media shows no interest, and the right is just as to blame as left media for this, shows no interest in the enormous scandal, misuse of public monies, terrorism, radicalization. As I mentioned, the Iranian regime runs several mosques in the state of Texas. I don't think I've ever seen a single media report really look into that. Dawati-Islami, which European governments are warning about. Again, no interest from the Houston Chronicle on that. The Dallas Morning News, which did a fantastic job with the Holy Land Foundation and the 2008 North Texas Hamas networks, has shown absolutely no interest since then of tracking the terrible crisis of radicalization in North Texas today. The media is incurious and unhelpful. So one thing I think that it really falls on sensible people here and organizations like me to do is to pressure journalists to start focusing on these stories, because they're not just betraying us, they're betraying the moderate Muslims as well who suffer under these Islamists and have their communities taken away. One thing I might just beseech you all to do is when you read our reports and reports from other like-minded organizations like TPPF and other groups, forward this information to your local paper. Ask you, why are you not covering this? This is in your backyard. Why are you not looking into this? What do you know about these groups? How are hostile governments manipulating American politics and radicalizing children? And why the hell are you not saying anything about it? Apply pressure. The media is to blame. And policymakers will follow suit.
Hi, my name is Janet Malzahn, and I'm a former constitutional law professor. And I want to know what organization is having this be anything but a straight-up attack on America, attack on the Constitution. It is 100% an attack on the Constitution and therefore on America. And if Charlie died for anything, he died for the fact that you can't have the Constitution without having the Judeo-Christian moral code, and there's simply no way we could have another legal system and retain America. It's theocratical. So that's the first part. Why are we not suing these people and making it a constitutional issue and bringing it up? And it should be in front of the Supreme Court, left, right, and center.
Amen. Yes. So yes, yes, you are correct. I think because we have had this inclination to do two things. One, cower if we're called a name, right? We've been raising our children for generations to be real nice, to be kind, to be inclusive, not to be brave and courageous and wise. And that is a crisis that we are looking to course correct with education policy. But to your point, I would encourage everyone to go back and understand the Long March Through the Institutions. Herbert Marcuse, that came out of the Frankfurt School in Germany. This is Marxism and identity politics at its core. He flew over the Atlantic because he was a Jew and Hitler just wasn't doing communism right. And so he joined at Columbia University, at the University of San Diego, at Harvard for a stint. This is embedded in our colleges of education. We have, the Long March to the Institutions sent out training for teachers. They sent out training in seminaries that as we were told by the Dodd report, when the Bella Dodd confirmed this, but also what Sam just said, media, business. Herbert Marcuse's third wife, Ricky Marcuse, was literally the first DEI trainer in Fortune 500 companies in the 1980s. So why? Because I'll say, as a Christian, oftentimes we go, let's turn the other cheek. Y'all, it is time to pick up your slingshots and your pebbles and start firing at those that are looking to subvert our way of life.
And one last thing, I want Greg Kassar nominated as a terrorist organization. I am running for U.S. Congress against Greg Kassar in District 37, and no one's giving us any attention, but it will be the top profile case come November. I promise you.
Thank you. Amen.
Yeah, just real quick. Do we have the tools at the bottom level to conduct the investigations in order to create these cases, in order to also bring them in front of the courts? I say no. Do our local law enforcement have the tools? Do they have the capacity or the capabilities to conduct these investigations? And are they prioritized by their city managers? Are they prioritized by their council, city council? Are they prioritized by their commissioner's court? Are they prioritized by their county sheriffs? There's a real prioritization problem as well as a capacity and capability problem at the local law enforcement. That's what we're seeing with immigration enforcement as well. When you look at, if we're trying to do mass deportations, which immigration is 100% tied into this issue. When you have a foreign national come into the United States, they are now beholden to many organizations. They're beholden to the Mexican cartels who brought them here. They're beholden to their foreign terrorist organizations from their home state like Al-Shabaab. They're beholden to the Muslim Brotherhood, to CAIR, to their imams here. They're beholden to the Democrat Party as well, or whatever party is seeking to protect them from immigration enforcement and from removal. When you allow local law enforcement, when you give them the tools necessary to conduct these investigations in targeting packages, when you give them the information and also the support from the federal government, the state government as well, the Department of Homeland Security that was just created here in the state of Texas, when you do that at a task force level using a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency plan, when we have that set in place, set in stone, and working with our local law enforcement to actually conduct these operations, then we can actually move forward. But yes, if we get it in the media, if we do all this stuff, but if we don't actually have the enforcement mechanisms at the bottom to do it, nothing's going to be able to be done. And so at the exact same time, working with our local law enforcement, working with DPS, working with the commander of DPS, Freeman, working with Tom Homan and his team, working with Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, all the above, to make sure that those of us at the local level that are actually doing what needs to be done to forward this operation, to do what you guys are asking for, it really needs to happen. And until that happens, we can say whatever we want in media. But the case, what was brought up before is, how can we make it sure that this is not a case against their First Amendment rights? Well, we must show that belief has transitioned to action. And until we do that, then it's going to be null and void. And so the only way that we can do that is through actual investigative work and actually doing these with local law enforcement.
Hello. Hi, my name's Dave Landrum. I'm from the UK. I'm an author. So it's really encouraging to see the fire in here and this policy conversation. I want to ask a question on a little bit of a different level. You've talked about Islamism rather than Islam, and our experience in the UK is that it's the latter that's the problem more than the former. This is more of a theological issue than an ideological issue. The ideology is where it plays out. If that is the case, if, for example, a moderate Muslim is actually a nominal Muslim, what are the policy responses there? How do you deal with Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of religion or belief, etc., which many of these organizations hide behind, weaponize and use? And how do you deal with this at a constitutional level in the US? What are the implications for civil liberties and human rights if that is the case?
Well, I'll answer the first part. As for the second part on the legality, I leave that to someone else in the panel. I'm not only am I not a lawyer, I'm just a Jew from the wrong side of the Atlantic. So, you know, I couldn't begin to talk about either the Judeo-Christian values of America or its constitution. However, on the Islam versus Islamism point, look, no set of ideas, whether a religion or political ideology, should be beyond scrutiny. That's the luxury we have with our freedoms in the West. And while I understand anti-Islamic thinking and and criticisms of the faith, I absolutely do see what's happening in Europe, and particularly in Britain, as an Islamist problem rather than a Muslim problem. I think you just have to look to parts of Southeast Asia to see Islam working peacefully and moderately. I think you just have to see sections of West Africa to see that it can happen even in the face of jihad. Most importantly, my organization, the Middle East Forum, employs Muslims. We work with Muslims. We fund Muslims who share the belief of us that Islamism is the enemy and the threat, and that they may have separate views on whether Sunni Islam requires reform or not, but they also see this modern political ideology as the greatest threat. And I think it's very clear, if you look at the people running the Muslim community in Britain and indeed across the West, that these are creations of a modern ideology formed in the last 200 years. And you can argue that Islam will inevitably lead to that ideology. Sure, you can have at it if you want. But as long as there are Muslims who oppose that ideology, I say that we draw a distinction between Islam and Islamism, and thus between Muslims and Islamists. And I leave it to someone else to answer the constitutional question.
Not a constitutional expert, but I will say that Eamon touched on it. When words become action, but also when they are weaponizing our Constitution to subvert our ideals. So, for example, when they are taking our money, when they are applying for humanitarian aid, when they are lying on their HB1, R1 visas, when they are setting up schools to drive money to them, whether it's public or private that's coming from blood money from the Middle East, all of that needs to be under scrutiny. As Sam pointed out, there are thousands of operators here in Texas with direct ties to foreign terrorist organizations. First off, they should not be here. We should not have allowed these entities into our country. But second off, if there is a direct tie, they absolutely must be prosecuted and put in jail. Tired of sending them off. We're not sending them back to go and plan it and do it again. You're in jail. When you are using money, when you are doing money laundering and racketeering and anything else to weaponize our government, that is what we have to go for. We have got to ensure that our laws are being enforced, and we obviously need to pass additional laws so that none of the money is going to these Islamists who seek to overthrow our government. Okay, so I'm being told we're out of time, but I do want to say something. There is a document where Kate has it in the back, but people always ask me, well, what can I do? One, you can forward the information just like Sam said. Put it out there. Talk about this. Don't be afraid of saying we have got to fight against this absolute evil that is encroaching upon our freedoms. But number two, on February 25th, the State Board of Education is going to host public testimony. This is really important. For those of you that don't know, in September, the State Board of Education passed a transformative history curriculum structure. When I say transformative, it is we are the first state in the union to have a chronological, classically based social studies history curriculum. That is important. The Marxist entities and the Islamists have formed a coalition, CAIR and AFT, working with different entities like the Texas Council for the Social Studies, the National Council for the Social Studies. These entities, they're real mad, y'all. They don't like that our kids in classrooms are going to learn contextual history. What was happening? Why were these decisions made? What was the Magna Carta? What was the significance? What was the Mayflower Compact? What was all of this? This matters. We have not been teaching our kids in context. So not only do they not learn it, which is why only 30% of kids pass the state exam for history, but also they can't understand the greatness of America and how Texas is our greatest embodiment. So if you are in Texas, I implore you, if you are in and around the Austin area and you can get here, I don't care where you live, come and testify to the greatness of America. Come and testify why it is important that we teach our students that we are the defenders of the free world, and that the only reason that we have the blessings that we enjoy, the only reason we have the prosperity is because the system of government that was set up by our founders, and our kids need to understand that. It is important. You can do it now. On February 21st, come and testify, because I will guarantee you that all of these nefarious entities, the Red Green Alliance, the Marxist Islamist History Coalition, they will show up. They will show up and they'll whine and they'll cry and they'll go, it's real mean not to talk about Palestine. It's real mean to talk about the greatness of America. Come and fight back. That is my call to action to all of you. Stand up, fight back, and together we can rid our country of this nefarious, evil system of Islamism and Islamists that are trying to circumvent and subvert our laws. Thank you.